So before I sit down, I want you to understand that there's another legal entity that's important for the food justice movement. And when I asked in the beginning how many of you have heard of food justice enterprises, in fact, a good number of those that were named were nonprofits. So it's important to understand how nonprofits play a role in food justice and how that might be a viable legal entity for you to choose. So Janelle has created these wonderful slides, and she's going to return to this imagery later on when she presents. Janelle is from the Sustainable Economies Law Center. But I want to have you think about, well, what do we do when we talk about economic activity and we talk about producing food and selling food? There's actually three spheres we can divide our world into, and that could be doing economic activity for our own personal benefit, our own personal consumption, so growing and selling food for personal consumption. We could do it for commercial reasons, and we could do it for this third sphere, which is complicated. It's the charitable sphere. So one example of a group that does work here in West Oakland, charitable activities, in the food space is City Slicker Farms. It works in West Oakland. It does training and education on how to grow healthy, organic backyard gardens and training people, and it's doing this as a charitable activity. And it has some economic activities associated with it in terms of growing and selling food. So how does it do this? Well, when you think about your personal activities, what happens if you start growing food in your backyard and you then start growing it and distributing it to a lot of people and you're eating a lot of it? What if you want a nonprofit that's just the whole purpose of it is to grow a lot of food and distribute it to people in the community? Is that something that we could call a charitable activity? Or what if you want the nonprofit to start growing all this food and selling it to the community? Could that be a charitable activity? What if we could think of a way in which we could create entities that serve all of these purposes? It serves the community, it's earning money, and it's something that generates income to keep itself self-sustaining. So these are the questions around nonprofits doing business and earning money. So let's go back to Janelle. She's decided she's going to create a soup cafe to do great things for the world. And these are all her slides, by the way. She's a great cartoonist. I'm just borrowing from her. So she wants to make this soup cafe a nonprofit. And she decides that she's going to make this cafe a 501c3 because that's the type of nonprofit that allows you to get grants and donations to fund your activities. It's also exempt from taxes. Sounds like a great idea. So she decides she's going to create an educational nonprofit that's going to teach school children and community members about nutrition and cooking, and then she's going to provide lunch to them for about $3 per student or person. So this should raise some red flags to you because she's actually selling these lunches, and so it's actually a business activity, and because she's going to do it on an ongoing basis. So then we want to think about, well, can the nonprofit do this type of activity? So let's think about, well, what is a nonprofit for and why do they exist in the community? Well, in California, the types of nonprofits that can get a 501c tax exemption are nonprofit public benefit corporations. And in order to get tax exemption, they need to show the IRS that they're organized and operated exclusively for a charitable or educational purpose. And if you can show that, so for example, if Janelle can show the reason why she set up this soup-making nonprofit is really to educate people all about where their food comes from, how they can produce it and cook it in a healthy way, and how they can create a healthy lifestyle around it, and show it's really about education and not about making money, then she could probably convince the IRS that it's a tax-exempt activity. So then she has this nonprofit exempt corporation, and she's running a business activity through her corporation, which is serving lunch. So she needs to make sure that business activity that she's doing through her nonprofit corporation is really closely related to what she told the IRS was her tax-exempt educational purpose. And so in order to do that, she has to show that that lunch service activity is substantially related to achieving this educational mission that she has. It has to contribute importantly and have a causal relationship. These are the terms that the IRS really loves to see. And finally, it can't be larger in scope than necessary to achieving her purpose. So if she starts expanding her lunch business and she opens up a whole network of lunch restaurants or cafes in the community, the IRS is going to say, well, did you really need to open up a whole network of cafes just to try and teach people? Wasn't it enough that you just had one small space in which you were teaching them out of? And is this really still an educational activity, or is it now becoming a business activity? And that's when you start running into other problems. So let's say Janelle then decides her lunches are so popular that she's going to start serving dinner. Well, and she has another thing she wants to do with her dinner. She's going to provide job training to recently released people re-entering people. So we should ask a question of, well, is this starting to look more like a commercial activity? And is this still what the IRS permits in terms of what a related business is? So we'll go back to the same analysis we did for the lunch and think about, well, she's making more money now off of this dinner because it's an expensive dinner. So she's probably going to start making some profits off of it. Before, for lunch, it was actually a very low-cost lunch, and it was aimed at serving the community, not making money. But she has another good thing, which is that she's providing job training for re-entering people. So she's added another element to it to make him look more charitable. So then the IRS will say, okay, that's fine, you can do job training, but this shouldn't be long-term employment, because it's not charitable activity just to be providing employment. That's what businesses do anyways. So it should be something that you train people and then spin them out and have them get jobs in the for-profit economy rather than just staying here and being employed by you, because that looks like it's just another business. An example of that would be Goodwill. That's the type of activities that they do. So this would be a question that's more on the line, and we want to make sure that this dinner activity really stays in the bounds of what the IRS wants. And it could, but the question here and what becomes blurry for nonprofits doing business activities is, when is their business activity a related business, which means it's part of your mission and it's substantially achieving all those tasks I put up there, and when is it not a related business? Because when it's not a related business, then the IRS says this is an activity that's going to be taxed. And that's the blue line at the bottom there. And that's okay. You can have a small percentage of your nonprofit's activities be unrelated and get taxed. But when it starts growing, then you should start worrying, because when the activities grow to a large portion of the percentage of your total activities, then the IRS says this is no longer a tax-exempt organization. This is a for-profit commercial organization. So the million-dollar question and the hard question to answer, and the question we really recommend you talk to lawyers about, is how do I know whether my activities are actually related or unrelated? And the IRS has a lot of guidance around it, which is like basic factors around, does it smell like it's commercial or charitable? Do you make a lot of money off of it? Do you provide low-cost services to low-income or disadvantaged people? Are you actually funded by grants, or are you relying solely on the income you're generating from your activities? And so it's not clear, it's very fact-specific, and it's going to be something you should probably seek assistance with if you're going to be starting to do a large business activity in your nonprofit. And finally, there's an option for, if it does grow too large and it's a successful business, then often what a nonprofit will do is actually they'll create a separate business. It's a separate legal entity, going back to the beginning of the conversation around different legal entities. It can be a for-profit legal entity like a corporation, and the nonprofit owns all of the shares in the corporation and gets income from the corporation in the form of dividends, but it's actually a separate legal person. And the IRS doesn't have a problem with that as long as you separate the two. So these are some options for nonprofits that want to do business in the community and earn money. And there's a lot more to be said about this, but this is just an intro.